Welcome to Demming Chronicles Season 2. We bring the voices of persons whose ideas and opinions are not in the mainstream. Demming Chronicles, this week's edition, we have Dr. Rae Furlonge. Welcome to the program.
Hi, Denise. Happy to be here.
And our next guest is Myron B.
Hi, morning. How are you going?
Hi, Myron.
All right, Myron. I know it's Carnival weekend, but it's afternoon or it's whatever time of day. But thank you very much for being with us. We'll be back shortly. Demming Chronicles. Welcome to Demming Chronicles Season 2. And on this week's program, our guest, Dr. Rae Furlonge. He's a transportation specialist. Welcome to the program, Dr. Furlonge. And I want to start with my first question. Where are we in Trinidad and Tobago with regard to transportation?
Well, we're in a crisis position. Sad to say, there are several reasons for being in such a position, but I guess we'll go into it as you expect.
All right, you've started by saying we're in a crisis position. Could you give me some of the reasons or some of the things you're seeing that make you describe us as being in a crisis position?
Well, there's a serious problem with access to transportation, and it's particularly affecting women and children. I mean, it's impossible to not see the number of vehicles on the roads. Yet, despite that, people still do not have access to transportation. So we have congestion, we have transportation problems of access, we have the commensurate pollution because of the vehicles, the number of vehicles created. And then, most importantly, there is no clear policy or plan for transportation. So those are key areas that we need to address, and we can go into them one by one.
So those are the characteristics you say that tell you we're in a crisis position. But when I look around, I see people driving. There are people who they have their own transportation. So really, what is the problem?
Well, driving is not access. That's perhaps, if you like, mobility. And of course, we can explain mobility is how frequently you're driving, and accessibility is how easily you're getting to where you wish to go, from getting access from where you're going and access to where you're going. So we can mix up the two. What you seeing, you mentioned a lot of people driving, but that is not efficient transportation. I'm happy you raised that. And really, where we should be going is in terms of transportation efficiency, which is what we don't have.
When you talk about transportation efficiency, could you tell me what do you mean by that?
All right, let's back up a little bit. Before I go into the terms, let's give a little background to what I'm speaking about here. The very last, the only transportation plan that we have had for this country, National Transportation Plan, was done in 1967. People may tell you, but one was done in 2005. That is the failed comprehensive national transportation study where they were trying to push rapid rail. I think you remember that. Everyone should remember that. So we have had no transportation plan since 1967. Good. Secondly, there are no transportation policies, overt transportation policies to guide us. What you have alluded to just now is really a default transportation policy promoted 25 years ago by government to make cars easy for government, for the private owners to access, cheap cars for the common man, and for them to make good revenue taxation on these imported vehicles. So that's the only policy that, if you like, overt policy, but we have not had policies to direct how efficient how people leaving their homes to go to work or school or whatever, the guarantee of them coming back home, They guarantee that if you have to participate in recreational activities, transportation will be provided. People waiting. You see the proliferation of PH vehicles. That's a major symptom of the problems of access to transportation.
Dr. Furlonge, could you just, I want to have clarity about what we're talking about. In developed countries, effective public transportation is a critical part of the national security grid. How do you feel about that in Trinidad? To what extent is transportation part of that security grid?
Well, you notice that's the first problem I mentioned with when you talk about, I talk about transportation crisis. It is the responsibility of government to guarantee transportation for people. Yes, people will not everybody will use it. People will access their own vehicles. But for those who need it, it should be there. And even if you have a vehicle, there might be a morning you get up and the battery in the vehicle is not working. You will want to get some form of, you call a friend, or you will want to get access to public transportation. So the organization and management of public transportation is a requirement. It is like it's like a utility. It's provision of electricity, water. Public transportation falls right up there. And we have never had that. One may say, well, you have the PTSC, the Public Transport Service Corporation. The PTSC is a publicly owned bus company. In fact, some people argue and say, it so happens that it's a government employment company that happens to deal in public transport, because they get to the tune of 400 million annually, and yet they're transporting of the order of 5 to 10% of the population.
What, in your opinion, would be the kind of normal level of the population that should be using a public transportation system? What happens in other countries?
Good. Well, the countries that invest in public transportation, and yes, there are major subsidies because you don't generate profit all the time from public transportation, because they are guaranteed in public transportation for everybody. The mix, or what we call the modal split, which means the ratio of public transport users to private transport users, is of the order of 60 to 40. 60% public transport, 40% private transport. And we had that up to 1997, despite no incentives or subsidies from government for public transport.
Dr. Furlonge, I just need to stop you there because I want you to explain what you just said. You were saying that there was a 60-40 modal split, and that is what is acceptable. And we had that. What happened?
Well, that is around the time we introduced the policy of cheap cars for the common man. To put it bluntly, government said they are going to make cars, we're going to make a business, we're going to make business for the common man to supply import vehicles, and we're going to make the common man also access whoever needs a car will get it cheaply, and we government will make a lot of money on taxes. And that flipped everything. In 10 years, we went from 60-40 to 40-60.
And what can we do to move that to that 40-60? What can we do to flip it again?
Well, now it's more like 30-70. So and that is why you see the result of it, the symptom of it is the congestion that you're experiencing, particularly in the urban centers. It is more difficult to get out of the urban centers than to travel on the highways. So far, the highways have become more easily accessible because of the wider lanes, the number of lanes and so on. But traveling within any urban center, whether it be Shagona, San Fernando, Port of Spain, you get major problems. What can be done? Okay. So in the short to medium term, short meaning 5 years, medium meaning 10 years, I expect the car will not disappear. You have to feed the car. Feed it, you have to supply the fuel for it. Yes, the disincentives for fueling, they're going up because the subsidies for fuel and so on, they're being reduced rapidly and so on. So, but you still have to fuel them. The world is going the way of electric vehicles. They're going the way of autonomous vehicles, meaning self-driven vehicles, all the sexy terminology for the manufacture of new types of vehicles. We will not be there, I do not think, in the near future. So we have to satisfy. However, we should create disincentives for the private car ownership while simultaneously creating incentives for a new type of vehicle. We do not manufacture vehicles here, we have to import them. So the importers obviously they need to import, then that's a business. So we should give them encouragement to import more public transport vehicles, like electric vehicles and so on. Yes, they're importing higher levels of CNG and so on, low carbon vehicles, but give them incentives to bring in public transport vehicles, the transit vehicles. Barbados is doing that. They just imported a large number of electric transit vehicles. Go the way of transit as the incentive to shift people from their vehicles. I'll use the next term called vehicle kilometer of travel. We need to reduce the vehicle hyphen kilometer of travel, meaning the number of vehicles that are traveled along a certain distance of road, vehicle kilometers. That is the world annual measurement. That needs to be reduced. If you like, you can increase the passenger kilometer, but we need to reduce the vehicle kilometer, and that way, an easy way to do it is the development of public transport, especially in the realm of low carbon vehicles. And that is the approach we should take. More than that, we need to manage, don't just bring in the vehicles, the management of public transport. Public transport has to be organized. The first mile, the last mile, the terms we use in transport, where people are coming from, they should be guaranteed transport. Where they are going to, they should have one fare. They should not have to pay a fare to walk to get the first car, then the second vehicle and so on. It should be an integrated fare. It should be guaranteed, scheduled. No, you cannot have schedules if you do not have subsidy. And that's where I talk about the shift in subsidy from private cars to transit. So you have instead of a private user subsidy, it should now shift to a transit user subsidy. And that is where the incentives, for example, I'm just giving an example. You have the fare that the transit operator will charge, then government will kick in every quarter or every month or whatever it is with a vehicle or passenger kilometer subsidy for the number of passengers that the operator would have transported in the area that they're transporting for that period. And that way they will be incentivized to operate with schedules. And you notice when I'm talking there, it is the future is really privately operated public transport. The future is not into publicly operated public transport.
Dr. Furlonge, all that I'm hearing is higher transportation costs for the man in the street, for the normal person who does not own a vehicle or who may not be able to own a vehicle. Is that what you're signaling? That it's the price?
Absolutely not. Absolutely not. I'm signaling a shift, I'll say it again and I'll explain in more detail, from private user subsidy, the roads you drive on. I'll give you the example. The private user drives on the same road as the public transport operator. Yet both of us pay the same price for the road, free. The diesel, many people think the diesel is the lowest price now. The diesel, the public transport operator, this excluding CNG, the public transport operator is using diesel and the private transport operator is using diesel. That should not be. It should be more costly for the private operator. So the subsidies are really favoring the private user. It has to shift. I don't like to use the word too much because we are disincentivized a whole lot in the society which we live. I'm saying if we encourage the public and the transit user incentives and pull back somewhat on the private user subsidies, then the cost doesn't have to go up. And by the way, government should have an interest in spending the money towards the public transport operator because it is their safety, it is their guarantee of access to where they are going, where they are coming from, and it will completely, the main part of it, it will completely eliminate the PH. The symptom of the problems of accessibility to public transport.
Dr. Furlonge, I just want to shift the conversation a little bit and ask the question, to what extent is productivity impacted by this absence of a regular or organized transportation system? How is productivity impacted?
Well, can you guarantee your trip to anywhere?
No.
Either you are early, very early, or very late. You can't predict how long it will take to. That's productivity right there.
Yeah.
We should have, and the answer does not lie, as some people tell you, putting more lanes and building more this and building more that. It is actually pulling back on the number of vehicles. So you are making you remember I talked about efficient transportation? It is making the use of the road more efficient by putting more people per unit of the road. That's what we're talking about, the passenger kilometer and the vehicle versus the vehicle kilometer. You are moving more people. Look at Singapore. Let's use it. Singapore is considered the paragon of public transportation. They're a quarter of the size of the island of Trinidad. Quarter of the size, 4 times the population. Yet they have 2 rail systems and 3,000 public transport buses. Right? That's quite apart from taxis and private. Anybody can buy a car, but you cannot use it until you get permission to use it on the road. You have to bid. And if you miss the bid this month, of course, the highest payment, you bid next month, you bid the next month, and it's for a year. So you do not have the right to use the road like we do. You have the right for public transport. So government jumped in and they said, listen, we are going to guarantee you access to transport. We are not going to guarantee you the right to use your car.
Dr. Furlonge, we have to bring this interview to a close. And in doing so, I wonder if you could share what would be your top priorities that we should focus on if we are to improve our transportation system.
All right, let's look at the short term immediately. For 40 years, we have been trying to introduce transport planners have been trying to introduce telecommute for people. COVID did it in one shot like that. We're doing it right now on this program. So that is something we should maximize in business, in whatever activity. Maximize the use of other forms of communication. We should be maximizing non-motor. We can do, I'm giving you the short-term things. Maximize non-motorized travel, especially in the urban areas. We can facilitate the footpath, the sidewalks and so on. Make it easier to get around by walking. Put peripheral parking, park there, and create things like restricted zones for the vehicle. So get people out, let them cycle, let them walk. So that's short term. The medium term, the medium term now, we should look at organization and management of public. Government has to become the regulator of public transport and make it organized with schedules and convenience, attractiveness, the shelters, the integrated fares, the safe terminals, and so that is medium-term activity. We should start that now, and then finally look into the future for the low carbon type. Even the medium we could start it, but the new forms of transportation, but all focused on reduction in vehicle kilometers.
And on that note, we bring this interview to a close. Dr. Furlonge has been with us and he's talked about transportation. He's talked about ensuring that we have safe transportation systems. He's talked about low carbon systems, low carbon cars or vehicles. He's talked about improving our bus shelters, improving our systems, our effectiveness of our programs and so on. He didn't talk about this, but I would love to see an app so that I know what time a bus is coming. Demming Chronicles, Season 2. Thank you very much. We'll be back with you shortly. Welcome back, Demming Chronicles, Season 2. And on this segment of Demming Chronicles, we speak with Myron B, who's one of the creatives in our country. Myron, when I say creatives, what do you think about?
No goodness. Well, when I say creatives, I think about every and anybody that is making a contribution, not only to the creative sector, but also through the expression. So when I say creatives, we're talking about, of course, the obvious ones, the entertainers, the musicians, the theater people, but we also have to look at the other creatives, which would be in fashion, dance, and art and craft as well.
All right. So that you see creative in a wide spectrum, both
Yes.
the performing arts as well as our painters and so on. But there's a bit of a dichotomy. People, traditional thinkers, see a link between professions like law and economics and medicine and so on, and income generation. But it's hard for them to see the link between the creatives and income generation. Could we talk a little about how that happens?
Well, I mean, for the most part, because of how society is structured and how people are rewarded in society, it is most times, especially locally, it is difficult for the creative body to basically come together well enough or form the right type of structure to start being recognized the way that we see ourselves. So what you would find locally is that the majority of the creatives are not in it 100%. They are hobbyists and seasonal creatives. Now, because of this, we have an ecosystem where we have a lot of creative hustlers. Everybody have their own little pocket of hustle going on and no organized structure, nothing keeping us together. And this is why the other professional disciplines would view us this way, and people in general. But in truth and in fact, there are a number of us and a number of bodies that have been working toward, and not just working toward, I should say, let me correct myself, that have been functioning in a professional capacity, right? And that is in fashion, design, entertainment, art, and across the spectrum. Now, in terms of how do we address that question, I think the first thing that needs to happen is that we need to come out of the hustle mentality as creatives. We need to start treating ourselves and respecting ourselves just as the other professional industries do. Now, for me personally, when I got into entertainment and arts, this is all that I've ever done. And it's through this I was able to get into branch off into other sectors. Right? I started on stage, and basically the stage is what has grown me from a teenager into a man, allowed me to provide for my family as well. And I always considered myself a professional in terms of having the capacity to live off of art, live through art, right? But what I found is that when I looked left and right and around, not much of us were actually doing this, right? The majority of the creatives that we enjoy had day jobs, right? And that was mind-blowing to me, because as a child coming up, I always thought the entertainers were professional entertainers, right? And that it was something different to the hustle that it is. Now, I didn't want it to be a hustle for me, right? I really wanted to have a professional entertainment career and build off of it. So where that is concerned, I think two things need to happen. One, the onus is on the individual to treat with himself differently. Approach his art and his craft as any other professional would do, because there's no blueprint, right? This is what I had to deal with. There's no blueprint that tells you how to be a professional entertainer in a real, true sense. So we have to learn, we have to educate each other. That's one. On the other side of the spectrum, we have to basically come together as communities and as institutions of creative professionals and start to incubate, nurture, and foster the right type of attitude so that we as creatives could now position ourselves to earn as professionals and deliver a professional standard of service within the creative sector.
Myron, that's an excellent inspiration for me to ask you the question about the creative hustlers. And how do you transform a creative hustler into a creative professional? What is required for creatives to thrive?
Right. Now, our entertainment, let me say creative sector, is inverted, right? It is not like any other, most, I should say, other territories around the world. So first of all, let's take, the one that I'm most actively a part of as a Calypsonian. So Calypso and Soca, we are bound by the 3 months of carnival, of the carnival season, right? And after that, we have to go back to our day jobs. Most, I should say, would go back to the day jobs until the season comes around again, and then they put on the costume, and they put on the entertainment garb and hit the stage. Now, what has to happen? What I've found is that in my journey, what I've seen is that a lot of people would prefer to be professionals, right? And because of how the entire situation is in terms of the system, we have people who would like to, they want to be professionals, but they're not getting enough gigs. They want to create art, but nobody is buying it, right? So there's a sense of dependency on someone else to provide an avenue for your creative output. And this is one of the things that I addressed in my situation very, very, very early. Because yes, there are people that would like what I do, and there are some people that would not. And what I opted to do was focus on the spaces that I could exploit to keep moving forward. So in terms of transitioning from that space where you are now a creative hustler, just looking for the next gig and looking for the next thing, you have to now look at yourself as a business enterprise, one, and look at every other professional sector and treat yourself accordingly.
But Myron, what you're asking is for me to be both a creative as well as a visionary, as well as a business person and so on. Yes. Is that fair to the individual whose only desire is creative expression?
Society requires it to be this way, right? Society requires it to be this way because the doctor has to be a businessman as well. Because as soon as he comes out of his internship and he starts going into his own private practice, he automatically becomes a business professional within his industry. Now, we have to understand that we have to do the same thing as well, and not just depend on a promoter to call us for a gig, or not depend on someone to have an art exhibition and see our work and decide to invite us to put our stuff on display. Now, the world has gotten a lot smaller over the years, and the capacity of creative professionals to get their work outside of our box, because, as I said, our system is totally different to everybody else's, right? Wherein, for example, we have no record labels for entertainers, right? We had music producers and record stores that used to push and promote our music, right? So you bring the stores in the old days, your song to the stores, and with the Crosbys and the Rhinas would send it to New York, and they send it out, and they print copies and they put it out. That was the old days. That's just before I got into the business. I saw the end of that, right? And then, of course, we have a situation now where entertainers don't groom their audiences. They have not groomed their audiences. So they depend on someone to put an audience in front of them and invite them to sing to them or perform to them. Now, this we have had the most successful entertainers that I could think about locally are the ones that were able to make that connection and groom their own audiences and build to mega levels, right? I would use Marshall Montano as an example, right? He started with his own promotions as far as I was able to see from where I sat. And I ain't talking about no, but we're talking about from the early 90s coming up in the parties and so on to what we have as Marshall Monday today.
Marshall Monday, yes. And Kes has done the same thing. So that you're saying that the creative, the artist, the performer has to groom their audience. Well, what is the role of the state in this area? What can the state do to strengthen and make that ecosystem suitable for creatives to thrive, for singers to thrive, for performers to thrive?
Well, I think the state, as they say, better could always be done. but the state has basically taken control of the carnival situation, which is our unique creative space, and they have for years invested in the carnival, right, and provided an opportunity for us to put our wares on display, as we say, right. Now it is not up to the state to take entertainer or artist and promote them to the world, right. This is a private enterprise, right. It is not up to the state the state would not educate the lawyer and then send them outside there to look for clients, right? So even if you would get scholarships or create opportunities, right? It is up to us to be able to put ourselves in the places that we need to be.
All right, and Myron, this is an excellent conversation. As we bring this interview to a close, tell me, what are the 3 things you would like to see happen in the creative sector so that we have an ecosystem in which we can all thrive?
Well, one of the 3 things. I mean, I would like to see digital education, honestly. Digital education. Now, for years, I've been advocating for the digital transformation of our cultural products, not taking live shows and putting it online. That is not the digital transformation of our products. The digital transformation of our products would include finding creative ways to put and push and promote our music, for example, right? So we're not just talking about putting the songs up on iTunes and all of that. We have movies, we have short film, we have all of these spaces that are available to us. And one of the biggest problems that I've encountered as an entertainer, as a digital marketer, as a music producer, and a videographer as well, one of the things that I've seen is that people are just not comfortable embracing technology and embracing new approaches, right? And this has significantly stymied our growth in the creative sector. So now we have a situation where people are chasing after, I like to use the YouTube example. Everybody trying to get on YouTube, trying to push this stuff on YouTube. Yes, YouTube, but the distribution metrics for West Indian and Caribbean territories, or territories that are not monetized with YouTube, is practically 0. So don't care how hard they push, don't care how hard they work, you're not going to hit the hundreds of millions of views and that kind of thing, because they are not going to allow that type of distribution, right? So we need to educate ourselves, learn about the technologies, learn about the digital space, right? And I mean, that's only one, right? They asked for 3. And but I don't think I could give any more than that in this time, because we have to now embrace our craft and basically digitize it the right way.
And on that note, I want to thank you, Myron, for being part of the program. You've brought our attention to the need for digital education. And it's not just a matter of pushing your stuff on YouTube in the hope that you will get hundreds of thousands of hits. You have to make sure that your material is designed and digitized in a way that you grow your audience. Demming Chronicles Season 2. On today's program, a long chat with Myron B and with Dr. Rae Furlonge. Until next time, like and share our program. Reach out to us, Demming Chronicles Season 2. Until next time, be safe.